Game week 10 looks like it could be one of the biggest game weeks of the season so far, with some amazing fixtures for some top teams and also a lot of FPL managers activating their wildcard going into the weekend. So in this video, I'm going to answer all of the hot topics that you need answering going into this weekend, as well as a reveal of my current wildcard teams. You're not going to want to make sure you miss out on that one. As always, if you can, drop a like on the video and smash that subscribe button. I'm always massively appreciated. Without further ado, let's get into today's video. Right, first up, one of the biggest hot topics going into this weekend is, do we need to sell a Spurs midfielder to accommodate an Arsenal midfielder? So what I've done in this section is I want to deep dive into Son and Maddison, because those are realistically the two options that a lot of FPL managers own that they're looking to maybe sell to jump on the likes of Saka, Odegaard, Martinelli for their amazing long-term fixtures, kicking off with Sheffield United at home. So looking at the heat maps right now for both Son and Maddison, I want to deep dive into basically game week 4 and beyond, because that is when Son moved as a forward in this team. And I feel like that's the only time we're getting a true reflection on how both players are featuring in their natural positions, because obviously Son is now the #1 forward in this team. So first up, we can see Son's touch heat map is so good from an FPL perspective. Everything is funneled between the sticks, plenty of penalty touch areas, getting in all the areas that you want to see. And naturally with Son, he's looking to stretch the team, get himself beyond the last defender. We've seen that in multiple games already so far this season. But his pocket players link up in the half spaces have been fantastic as well from a general football perspective. Now looking at Maddison's touch heat map that you can see on the far end there, very, very busy. But we'd expect that for him being the #1 creative source in this Spurs team. Plenty of touches in the midfield area, also in the penalty box, but naturally not as central as what we have been seeing Son with. But that is what we expect to see. Son is the forward, Maddison is the #10, picking up the pieces, creating things for this team to naturally feed Son for goals. The big thing that we need to consider with Maddison is that he is on all indirects, direct, and of course corners, which is a real big factor, because as another avenue for points, and I always discuss this, a team could play terribly, a player could play terribly, but if he's a corner taker, if he takes indirect free kicks, all it takes is one of those and a player to get on the end of it, and he's picked up assists and sometimes bonus points. So that's really important to note, because Son mainly is coming from open play opportunities and maybe a penalty if we do see finally who the Spurs penalty taker is in this team. Now, of course, a touch heat map only tells half of the story. We need to look at the underlying numbers for both of these players. And again, it's worth noting, this is between game weeks 4 and game weeks 9, basically since Son has been deployed as a forward. So we can see the underlying numbers here based on per 90 minutes. So first up, the ones in blue is basically the player who is winning in that department. And you can see all of the goal threat sections, Son is winning. Expected goals 0.71 per 90, shots 4.13 per 90, even the likes of shots in the box, which we saw from the touch heat map, him getting plenty of penalty box touches shouldn't come as a surprise. He has 2.95 shots in the box per 90. When we compare that to Maddison, his is basically half of that in a lot of the areas. Shots in the box only 1.25, and it is worth noting that has started to regress since Son has played as the #9 in this system. Shots 3.05 and expected goals being 0.27. So really good underlying goal threat numbers for Maddison. 0.27 for a #10 in a team is good. It's just when we compare it to someone like Son, who plays for the same team, who has such better goal threat, it makes you start to question whether Maddison is actually going to get in amongst the goals as consistently as that of Son. But what I really do like about Maddison is how well-rounded he is as an FPL option. We can see when it comes to creativity, Maddison leads the way. Expected assist 0.43 per 90. But it is worth noting, Son at 0.29 is not bad numbers at all. And when you actually compare that XA and XG for Son, really, really impressive numbers. We can also see here big chances created 0.72 for Maddison, and the attempted assists. I like to see that because the numbers there of 3.59 show how much of a creative force he is in this team. He is the one that is basically driving the team in those attacking third areas. So looking at the underlying numbers and the touch heat map, we come to a natural conclusion that Son is the right option to keep going forward. However, we need to consider the price points of both. Son being 9.5 million and James Maddison at the time of recording being 8.1 million. So yes, you guys might have some value built up in them. You might have bought them earlier, but there is quite a big difference between these two players. And the thing we need to understand, especially if you're wildcarding right now, is you might have a combination of Son which means that you have to have a cheaper fifth midfielder. Or if you go down the Maddison route, you could maybe have Maddison plus a 6.5 million midfielder. So when we look at this, Son is the answer. Son is the best Spurs midfielder to keep longer term. And if you can accommodate him in your team, he is the route to go. I don't see a situation where he is not going to outscore Maddison over the next 6 game weeks. Now, it's worth noting, touching on the fixtures, they're tricky. Crystal Palace are quite stingy defensively. I know they conceded 4 in the previous game week, but at home, I think that's a tough game for Spurs, especially with only a 4-day rest between their Monday night fixture and their Friday night fixture against them. Chelsea, I know people have wrote a lot about Chelsea, but I think defensively they're still quite good. Wolves, I think that's a good fixture. Villa, I think is a good fixture as well. But then Man City and West Ham, I think there's a mixed bag there for Spurs. But what we need to understand is Spurs are not playing any European Cup football. They are resting during the week while other teams do compete on other fronts. So, to conclude, I do think Son is the best Spurs option going forward. However, I think investment in the Spurs midfield is necessary regardless. And if you're in a position where Maddison actually accommodates really well with another midfielder in your team, yes, I think Son is going to outscore Maddison. But looking at the numbers of Maddison and the minutes that he's playing, I think Maddison plus a 6.5 million midfielder is probably a better combination in some situations. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. We're going to touch on Arsenal midfielders now because we need to understand if we are going to sell one of them, which one is actually worthwhile selling. But for me, if you can keep Son, you definitely do so. So looking at the Arsenal midfielders that we need to consider going into game week 10, I've brought up Martinelli and Saka. And the reason why I haven't got any other midfielders in the equation here is because Odegaard priced at 8.5 million. I don't really see a world where you pick Odegaard over Saka. So I think Saka is the best at 8.5 million. And then of course Martinelli is significantly cheaper than Saka at 7.7 million. So we do need to understand when we're looking at these underlying numbers, when we're looking at the touch heat maps, Saka is 0.8 more expensive. So make sure you do keep that in mind because that could be the difference between some people being able to build a wildcard team that they love and one where they try and squeeze Saka in and downgrade in other departments. So look at the underlying numbers in the touch heat map. This is from game week 1 and beyond. Heat map wise, literally identical. We have basically got a situation where Saka's is basically flipped over onto Martinelli's. So on a general overview right now, there isn't really much to draw from conclusions based on who is better. Both are getting in them wide areas and coming in into the midfield and also in the penalty box area. We expect that from both, cutting in on their favoured foot and scoring from those tight areas or in those central areas. So for me, heat map doesn't really show anything clear right now. So we need to move into these underlying numbers. And of course, Saka is leading the way right now for expected goals at 0.53. We need to understand that he has been on penalties as well, which has slightly skewed his XG per 90. When we take out penalties for Saka, his non-pen XG per 90 is actually 0.38. So better than that of Martinelli's, but it is worth noting, of course, they have been slightly skewed. And it is also worth noting that, of course, we don't even know who the penalty taker is for Arsenal. Saka's taking them, Odegaard's taking them, Havertz is taking them. So when we were having the discussion between Martinelli and Saka, I don't even think we can sit here and say that Saka is the penalty taker over Martinelli. So that isn't really a consideration right now when we're looking at the two options. Look at the other departments here. Shots in the box is in Martinelli's favour at 2.05. But that isn't really a surprise to me because when we have seen Arsenal play their best team with Gabriel Jesus as the number 9, Saka right and Martinelli left, they do have a tendency to allow Martinelli to come in off that flank and be the highest player in the team trying to break the lines, whereas Saka is more of a ball dribbler in those wide areas. So that doesn't surprise me at all that Martinelli's had more shots in the box. And I do think that if we are continuing to see that front three longer term, we would see Martinelli actually get into some better goal scoring opportunities, breaking the lines. However, we do need to talk about the elephant in the room, and that is going to be the injury to Gabriel Jesus sustained last night in the Champions League. Now, we don't know the extent of it right now, but with a Sheffield United at home fixture in game week 10 and Jesus may be struggling, it seems like an easy fixture for Arteta to play Enquiries as the number 9. And you guys know that I don't really like Martinelli when he does play alongside Enquiries. Jesus' game of dropping in deep into those false 9 areas allows Martinelli to stretch the game. And if Enquiries is in the side, he doesn't necessarily have that ability that Jesus does. He allows them to stretch the game, meaning that Martinelli's real strength isn't necessarily being utilised in the team. So it is worth noting that if Gabriel Jesus is ruled out for the longer term, I think that really does favour Saka as an FPL option rather than Martinelli. But Looking at the players right now, I do think Arsenal investment is necessary because of Sheffield United at home in game week 10. Yes, game week 11 is tricky, but game week 12 onwards is fantastic for Arsenal. And if I was buying one right now, I would just pay more money to get Bukayo Saka in your team. I think Martinelli has the opportunity to be a fantastic differential in that Arsenal team, but at 7.7 million and the rotation threat of Trossard on that left flank, I just think paying a little bit more for Saka, who potentially is on penalties as well, and I would expect to have better minutes over the next 6 fixtures, is the better use of your money. And what I always say to people is, if you pay for the premium, you know you can downgrade to the other option. So if after 3 game weeks we understand that Martinelli is the one that we should have owned, then you can easily downgrade Saka to Martinelli. It's slightly more difficult to upgrade Martinelli to Saka. So conclusion, I think Saka is the way to go. I think he's the better FPL option. He's more of the talisman in that team. But of course, if you want to double up, I like the route of Saka and Martinelli in your wildcard teams. Next up, I want to talk about those budget midfielders for those managers that are either wildcarding or as part of a free transfer strategy or point sit strategy, maybe trying to accommodate a cheaper option to afford all these premiums that we want to own in the game right now. So the 4 players I want to bring up were going to be Palmer, Gordon, Douglas Luiz and Pedro Neto, because all of these are below 6 million. It's worth noting a bit of talk about Souček at West Ham, but I personally don't think he is necessarily a long-term pick for me. I prefer these 4 options as considerations for your FPL teams. So first up, I want to talk about Cole Palmer because he's been a very popular asset in the last few game weeks. Looking at him because, of course, at 5 million and being a penalty taker for Chelsea, naturally a lot of us have looked at it and think, is this just the biggest gift in the game? So look at the underlying numbers right now. 0.64 XG per 90 is amazing numbers. But I do want to mention that, of course, he has taken 2 penalties for Chelsea. His non-pen XG per 90 is actually 0.25. So please do remember that when we are seeing this number, that his open play XG is actually a lot less than that. But still, a player that's on penalties for a team isn't a bad thing at all. It's actually a good thing when we need to consider those things. Expected assists as well. This is the thing that I've been really impressed with Cole Palmer, being the link-up play in this Chelsea team. I don't think anyone else in the team can actually do what he does coming off that right flank. And I think that's really going to play into his benefit where, yes, I do think he will get rotated over the next 6 game weeks. But I think right now, if Pochettino was picking his best 11, Cole Palmer would be that coming off the flank. So really good news right now for Cole Palmer. And even though the fixtures are not amazing, it's worth noting, Brentford, Spurs, Man City, Newcastle, Brighton, Man United, I do think that him being in the team alone and the way that Chelsea is slowly getting better is just a good investment long term, because game week 10, I really do like him at home against Brentford. Spurs, yes, that is a tricky fixture alongside City, but at his price point of 5 million, if you do have the squad that enables it, you could happily bench him in any fixture knowing that if he does do well, it's just an added benefit knowing that you have such a great player waiting in the wings when you want to bring him back into your team. So Palmer, a great option in my eyes. I don't expect him getting rotated, but do know that his minutes are slightly risky where he may come off early. Looking at the other options, Gordon is another consideration for us at 5.6 million. Slightly more expensive, but better underlying numbers in terms of open play. 0.33 XG per 90, 0.29 expected assists per 90. Really good underlying numbers. We need to also remember with Newcastle is that they do have Champions League football, whereas Chelsea don't have that problem at all. But the injury long-term to Harvey Barnes and also the situation with Tonali means that another player that would compete for Gordon's position in Joel Linton will likely drop into that midfield 3, seeing Gordon's game time probably be better than what we first expected over at the long term. Now, looking at the fixtures, I think they're quite mixed, but the tough fixtures are at home, and that's a really good thing for Newcastle because they are just an absolute beast when it comes to St James's Park. And even though Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United, I actually think they're okay long-term fixtures, and Gordon at Newcastle is definitely catching my eye right now as an enabler for our FPL teams. But of course, 5.6 million, slightly higher of the price bracket if you can't necessarily accommodate him in your teams. The other 2 that I want to talk about, Douglas Luiz is getting a lot of talk right now, but I'm personally going to rule him out as an FPL option. Yes, his XG per 90 is okay at 0.35, but we have to remember he's taken a lot of penalties. His non-penalty XG, his open play XG, is actually 0.08. So I'm not expecting him to continue this trend of goal scoring unless they were to get penalties or he continues to score worldies from the edge of the box. So Douglas Luiz for me is not a consideration in our FPL teams. And last up is going to be Pedro Neto at 5.8 million. Now, the Wolves fixtures are the best of the four: Newcastle, Sheffield United, Spurs, Fulham, Arsenal, Burnley. A little bit of a mix, but with Neto's guaranteed game time and, of course, his influence in the team from a creative perspective, I think he's a good investment. 0.3 expected assists per 90, 0.17 XG per 90. They're good numbers, but do I expect a monster haul from Neto over this period to justify the 5.8 million price bracket? Probably not. I think he'll tick over really nicely in the team, but I can't justify paying 0.8 million more than that of Cole Palmer, who I think is a great enabler. So, to conclude, the way that these are kind of numbered right now is actually the way that I'd rank them. I think Cole Palmer is number one at 0.6 million cheaper than Gordon. I just think that does a lot for those that are wildcarding right now. I think his game time's good. He's on penalties. And I think game week 10 at home against Brentford is actually a really good entry point to start him, knowing that if you have the squad available, you could just bench him in game weeks 11 and 12 if you really wanted to, or 12 and 13, and then play him in that good Brighton fixture from an offensive perspective. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. I think Cole Palmer is definitely an enabler for our teams. Now, the other area of midfielders that I wanted to talk about was those mid-price midfielders. We discussed the budget ones. Now I think it's time to talk about those that are between basically the 6 to 7.5 million price bracket, because I think there are four really, really good options that those who are doing free transfers or wildcard need to consider. And that is going to be Mbeumo, Bowen, Diaby and Mitoma. So again, look at the underlying numbers for both. Mbeumo leading the way for XG per 90 at 0.52, but we do need to remember he is taking penalties in that Brentford team, which does slightly skew it, but decent expected assist numbers at 0.19 as well. And of course, those that actually held him long term had their faith repaid in game week 9 with that 14-point haul. Bowen, a player that is really hot on my radar right now, 7.4 million, so he is the most expensive of the bunch, and he would require a little bit of surgery if you were trying to accommodate him in your wildcard teams. But his XG per 90 is good at 0.44. Yes, he isn't on penalties in the team, but we do know he's the main goal threat in that West Ham team. And with the fixtures coming up, they are the best of the bunch. Everton at home, Forest at home, Burnley away. Really, really good long-term fixtures for him. And if you were looking to invest in him or any of these assets, it feels like now is the right time to jump on them. So Bowen right now is a real consideration for my personal team. The other two that I want to talk about is Diaby. Now, Diaby's numbers have been a little bit underwhelming, even though his actual eye test has been fantastic. 0.21 XG per 90. I think when you watch him, you expect it to be a lot more than that, but it's Watkins who's getting all of the headlines right now. But what I like about Diaby is expected assists per 90 at 0.5 is ridiculously good. And look at those fixtures: Luton, Forest, Fulham. You can expect him to do really well over that period as well. The big thing about Diaby is, do you want to double up with both Diaby and Watkins in your team, assuming that Watkins is an essential in those wildcard sides? Last up is Mitoma that I want to touch on. XG per 90, 0.32. Expected assist, 0.22. Solid underlying numbers. And we think Solly March does have a bit of an injury right now, which means a dinger likely is going to compete on that right-hand side. And I'd expect Mitoma to get really good game time over the long term. But of course, Brighton, Aston Villa and West Ham all have midweek matches in the Europa League that we need to understand could mean rotation in certain Premier League fixtures. So let's draw some conclusions on this situation right now. So the way I look at it is this. Diaby is an amazing FPL option, but he wouldn't be my priority right now. And the reason being, it comes down to the strategy of, do you want all your eggs in one basket, or do you want to try and spread them? And what I mean by that is, you're most likely going to have Watkins in your wildcard team or in your general team. Do you want to double up on the Aston Villa attack? I think it's definitely a logic behind it because of that Luton fixture, Forest and Fulham. But looking at the fixtures for the likes of Brighton, maybe what you could do is have Watkins as your Aston Villa coverage and get yourself a piece of the Brighton attack in Mitoma. We've seen the numbers are pretty decent. The fixtures are good. Fulham, Everton, Sheffield United, Forest. The next four are amazing. And we do know that, of course, Brighton are a brilliant attacking team in general. We expect them always to put up around 2 XG for the team. So what I do like maybe is actually accommodating one of those spots for Mitoma rather than Diaby, just because you know that you've got the funds already in place for Watkins. I don't really want to go double up on Villa and leave myself exposed for Brighton, because I think when you're wildcarded, you want to jump on the next best team, and I think Brighton could be that over this period. Mbeumo, I think, will tick over amazing over this period, but the fixtures just don't do me any justice right now. I think game week 14, maybe we could look to come off one of our assets like a Jared Bowen or a Mitoma and look to bring in Mbeumo for that Luton fixture around that period. And Bowen for me is an amazing option. So right now, if I rank them, I would have probably Bowen number 1, Mitoma 2, Diaby 3, and Mbeumo number 4. But of course, it is all dependent on what your team is looking like right now. So I couldn't do a Game Week 10 preview video without talking about the situation with Trippier. Now, he has been one of the best players in the game, let alone defenders, with his consistent returns, bonus points, and assists. We haven't seen any goals from him this season, but I do think that it's only a matter of time with the way that he is playing. So the reason why he's a discussion for Game Week 10 is because those that are wildcarding are struggling to fit him in their team. In order to accommodate Trippier plus the big 5 premiums of Haaland, Watkins, Saka, Son and Salah, it literally is impossible. You basically just have to put in loads of 5 million assets in the midfield, cheap forward and all cheap defenders in order to accommodate him. So can we go without Trippier? Well, the numbers suggest no. Expected assist per 90, 0.38 is better than most assets in the game apart from the Stupinan. Big chances created, 0.7 per 90. You can see the bonus points at 1.41 per 90, which is ridiculous. And of course, the expected points being at 6.5. If you saw that as a midfielder or a forward, you'd be delighted. So the fact that it's with a defender is just amazing. Now, I actually think the fixtures are really tough, but the tough fixtures are at home: Arsenal, Chelsea, Man United. And if they kept clean sheets over that period, would you be surprised? Absolutely not. But we need to come to some quick conclusions on Trippier because, of course, Game Week 10 for those that are wildcarding, if you move away from Trippier, you ain't going back. You ain't going back to him at all. And after building a wildcard team, and I will show you it in the next slide, I've come to the conclusion that I think Trippier can be sacrificed from Game Week 10 and beyond. Would I love to do it in Game Week 11 and beyond? Yes, because I think there's another haul potential in Game Week 10 away against Wolves. So I don't think it's the right time to move away from Trippier. And of course, if you're not wildcarding right now, I really would consider keeping him, because the reason being, he is going to become more and more of a differential as we go on. People who are wildcarding in Game Week 10, I think, are going to struggle to afford him, meaning that if you keep him, those points become even more important over this period. And of course, it's worth noting, they are one of the highest XG teams in the league. So while that continues, and Trippier being a force of nature in that team, attack and returns are going to continue flowing over this period. So do I think Trippier is the best defender in the game? Absolutely. But can you sacrifice him to afford other premiums? You can. And the way that I've built a wildcard team right now, I just think you have to make sacrifices somewhere. And unfortunately, I am going to make them with Trippier and my own personal wildcard team. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. I know he's a big sacrifice, but we have to make it somewhere. So let me show you my wildcard team right now and how it is looking. Right then, here is how my Game Week 10 wildcard draft is looking. Now again, we have a few more days until that Game Week 10 deadline. And I'm kind of hoping something exciting happens in the Champions League or Europa League. I don't wish upon a big injury to any player, but maybe just a slight knock which shakes things up a little bit, because this does feel like it's quite template to a lot of other FPL managers. But again, I don't really care about that, because it's all about the combination of the players that you have. So I have quite poor team value, and I've been able to afford this team, so hopefully you can do so as well. And it's worth noting, I basically have 1 or 2 big deliberations that I need to make in this team, and I will discuss them when we get into sections. So goalkeepers, I've gone for Strakosha and Areola. Matt Turner, yes, is a good rotation with Areola, but I kind of think Matt Turner could lose his place at any point. Therefore, I might as well just start Areola each and every game week and maybe have the opportunity of Strakosha becoming the number 1 at Brentford. I don't think there's a big difference between either Turner or Strakosha. And if I can save 0.1 million, then I'll do so with my terrible team value right now. Moving into defenders, I've owned Matty Cash for quite a while, so I've accumulated a lot of value in him. So he's in the team, and I think it's very difficult to ignore him with the next 3 fixtures for Aston Villa, knowing you can maybe sell him after game week 12 or 13. Gabriel, another player I think is a great investment for those Arsenal fixtures. The only one I think is actually worth investing for minutes and value. And also Shimikas at 4.5 million. I picked him up at 4.4. I expect him to play the next few games for Liverpool. A real gem of an FPL option at 3.9 million. And I've also chucked Lascelles in. I need a 3.9 million midfielder. He kind of ticks the boxes right now. I'm hoping Botman might be out for a few more game weeks. Lascelles, I think, will continue in the Newcastle team. And yes, he will lose his place eventually, but I don't see any 3.9 million options starting week in, week out for their teams. So I might as well buy the one who's playing for one of the best defences in the league right now, knowing that he'll be my third bench later down the line. And last up, I got Mark Guy at 4.5 million. Now, I think Crystal Palace's fixtures are one of the best long-term, and defensively, they've been okay so far this season. Now, I have a bit of value tied up in your doggy, who I do currently own, so I may just look to keep your doggy, who offers maybe a bit more attacking potential, but Guy at a little bit of a cheaper price means that I might be able to accommodate more players in this team. For that reason, I currently have Guy because he rotates quite well with the combination that we have in this side. Moving into the midfielders. Now, you will notice that I have a big absence of Son in my team. But we got Saka, we got Salah, Bowen, Maddison and Mitoma. So in my eyes right now, Saka, Salah and Bowen are pretty much locked into my teams. It's a perfect combination of great fixtures and the talisman in their sides, as well as being penalty takers, hopefully in the shape of Saka and Mo Salah. But Bowen is one that I really can't look past right now. Now, the big deliberation for my wildcard team is Mitoma and Maddison versus Cole Palmer and Son. Basically, combined, they're the same price. And I need to understand whether I want to go for the second best Spurs option in Maddison, but get myself the best Brighton asset with those amazing 4 fixtures, or get the best Spurs asset in Son, sit with him and downgrade Mitoma to Cole Palmer, who I still think is a brilliant option, but of course one would argue really tricky fixtures, and of course maybe a minute's risk from maybe an earlier substitution than that of Mitoma. So that's the big deliberation I have for my wildcard right now, because the forward line is pretty much locked in. Watkins and Haaland with Mabama as my third sub or second sub. Yes, if I can afford it, I would change that to Archer. But I think the Watkins-Haaland combination is definitely the route to go for, knowing that after 3 or 4 game weeks, I can downgrade Watkins to maybe a Darwin Núñez if he looks like he is absolutely essential in the game. So that is how my wildcard team is looking right now. The real decision is Mitoma and Maddison or Son and Cole Palmer. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll be really interested to know. Yes, guys, okay, that is going to wrap up today's Game Week 10 preview. I really hope it's covered off some of the hot topics that you needed answering. If I haven't, please do let me know your questions in the comment section. And of course, I'll be answering them all the way up until the Friday deadline. That just leaves me to say, please do consider dropping a like and smashing that subscribe button on this video. And I will see you in the next one. Take care. Cheers.